based on the built environment, skewing forms and often referencing language and humor, but he also curates. So his art has been sort of featured at places like Susan Hilberry here in Michigan, but also across the world, from the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in New York and then the Milchoff Pavilion in Berlin, Germany. And then he also curates at the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston, and he's visited numerous universities as a visiting critic. And he's been on many panels, including the sort of United States Artist Fellowships and Massachusetts Cultural Council and Rhode Island State Council for the Arts. And he recently was elected to the Board of Trustees of Haystack Mountain School of Craft in Maine. So I am very excited to welcome Fabio Fernandez here, but before he comes up to the podium, there's someone more important who I need to welcome up, and that's our new director, Chris.
I'm not sure about more important, but it's great to see everybody here this afternoon. So, Fabio, nice to see you. So, on behalf of the Cranbrook Academy of Art Alumni Circle, it is my pleasure to inform you that you have been selected for this year's Alumni Achievement Award recipient. So, as the name implies, the distinction is intended to recognize achievement by an Academy graduate in the first half of their career. You are being honored for your remarkable record as both an artist and an educator, and we applaud the important critical attention that your work has received. But moreover, we want to congratulate you on the new position as director of the Museum of Arts and Craft in Boston, which you'll take up January 1st. So that's really great. This recognition also confirms the Academy's pride in its alumni and our desire to highlight their accomplishments. We will announce this honor to all of our alums, members of the Cranbrook Educational Community's Governing Board, and of course the local and national press. And this was a secret today, so what we'll be doing is sending out a whole lot of press after this, okay? So look for that. The Alumni Circle is a committee of the Cranbrook Academy of Art Board of Governors and includes alumni, governors, administrators, and friends of the academies among its members. The Alumni Circle proposes candidates for this award at the beginning of the calendar year and is subject to approval by myself. You are selected from an impressive list of graduates, all of whom have achieved great distinction at an early age. So again, congratulations on this award, and we will be sending you a certificate in the mail, a framed certificate in the mail, in the coming weeks. So let's give Fabio a huge round of applause for this year's recipient. So without further ado, let's go. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Where do I pick up the Mercedes? Wow, that's quite a surprise. Wow, so you guys kept it secret. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Wow. Okay. So we have a pretty intimate group here. I figure I'll talk for about 35 minutes. Is that Greg Tom there? Yeah, hi. Greg, how are you? Linda Ross, Tim Mash. Oh, it's great to see such familiar faces. Andrea Ice. Yeah. All right. I'm flattered that so many of you came out. Thank you. So I figure I'll talk for about 35 minutes and then 10 minutes Q&A, or if you're too shy to ask a question, then I'm sure conversations will ensue afterwards. I love these pointers. So thank you for the introductions. I am an artist and a curator. So there's the me part, right? So Muhammad Ali was asked to offer a poem to the press, and he said, "Me, we," right? The shortest poem on record. And it talks about the individual and the individual's role in the larger community. And I feel that way about my work as an artist, but then also my work as a curator. You know, there's the inward looking, but there's the outside looking curator that's all trying to frame conversations and exhibitions, and so there's the raising of the tide raises all boats, right, or whatever that expression is. But so quick bio. I have a friend who teaches at Penn State, and he says that whenever they have a visiting critic, the visiting critic or artist will come in and give their lecture, and they'll start by saying, you know, when I finished my MFA at Yale, I blank. I wanted to give you just a little more context for my brief life so far. So as AJ said, I was born in Uruguay, raised in New Jersey, went to Seton Hall University, studied business, and while I was at Seton Hall, my last semester, I had a chance to take a ceramics class. And I felt that I really responded to the idea of making with your hands and your mind in a way that I did not respond to a financial accounting class or a business calculus class. But I took this class my senior year at Seton Hall. I was a business major. I felt like I had to get along with my life in the business context, and I did. And I went to work for the Prudential Insurance Company. That's a different color because that was a real turning point for me. After a few short months at the Prudential Insurance Company, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. And as you know, as I was leaving / getting fired, it kind of put some things into context for me. So I went to Texas, and I became a volunteer in Service to America, which is roughly the equivalent of the domestic Peace Corps. And in Texas, I worked in a low-income community on the Mexican border, getting people to barter services with one another. After that, I went to teach through the Teach for America program in Phoenix, Arizona. I taught 8th grade at-risk students, inner city. And then I decided I wanted to be an artist. So there was a real gap between having an undergraduate degree in business and knowing that I wanted to go to a really good graduate school. So there are a number of things I had to do to get into Cranbrook, and I did those things. After Cranbrook, I was an associate curator at the Art Museum, and I'll talk a little bit about how that evolved. And then moved to Boston. Also at Cranbrook, I met my wife, Christine Dunn, who's in the audience, architecture alum 2001. So then I moved to Boston. I became a curator at the Society of Arts and Crafts, and as Chris said, in 2015, I'll take over as the executive director. Okay, so before going to Cranbrook, this is the type of work I was looking at. So I've been doing critiques in the sculpture department yesterday and today, and I really see the me, we aspect of it, because I see me in a lot of the things that you all are going through now, either as first semester students or as third semester students. So before Cranbrook, I was looking at Donald Judd, and I was looking at Tony Smith. I was really drawn to minimalism and the mostly male work of minimalism, M-A-L-E, right? I mean, there were certainly a lot of women, or there were few women doing minimalist type work, but unfortunately they didn't get the attention that a lot of the men did. So that's what I was looking at, and that's the type of work I was making too. So I was making these small, very geometric minimalist sculptures, also referencing architecture in one way or another. So that's the type of work I thought I was going to be doing at Cranbrook. And then I got to Cranbrook, and somehow that didn't seem like the right thing to do. Like everything changed, right? You come here thinking that you're going to pursue this line of inquiry, and the place changes you in a number of ways real quickly. And I remember the first couple of months here, there was a bit of paralysis. I was like, wow, I got into Cranbrook. What the hell am I going to do? So maybe some first-year students can relate to that. And I remember Heather McGill said, okay, we need to select studios, and we're going to draw straws to see who gets first pick for studios. And I thought, drawing straws. I didn't know what else to make, but when I heard drawing straws, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll draw straws. Maybe it was like the business training, very kind of linear training, but it seemed like as good of a place to start as any. And it really got me interested in drawing in a way that I had never been. So I did, hundreds of these drawings of flexible shaft straws. And then, you get to Cranbrook and you learn about the history of the place, right? So Charles and Ray Eames and the tandem seating that we see in airports all over the world, and the arm shell rocker, fiberglass. So Charles and Ray Eames loom large at Cranbrook. They still loom large in the world. And there's Harry Bertoia, and there's Eero Saarinen, like, the big three as I think of them. Certainly there are many others, right? Ralph Rapson, Harry Weiss, Florence Snow. But those are like the three ghosts in the air that I feel that you have to contend with, or I felt like I had to contend with or respond to in some way or another as a student in the sculpture department. So I did. I started, and then I started collecting objects. So I came to Cranbrook, as I was telling someone earlier, in my Volkswagen Golf, and everything I had was in that Volkswagen Golf. 5 years later, I had to rent a 14-foot U-Haul, which Allison Wong and John helped me pack. And part of the reason is that I became interested in objects because of the history of design at Cranbrook. The second part of it is that there's so many thrift stores here. So I felt I was spending a lot of time in thrift stores and feeling a little guilty about it. Like a lot of my other peers were in their studio, but for me, somehow my studio practice had extended to the thrift store. Like where, we understand cultures through the objects that have been made, and we put these objects in museums, right? Thrift stores give you a little slice of that, but you could also purchase the thing, and often purchase it really inexpensively. So I went full bore on that. So those are water skis, and this is Eames, an early Eames arm shell that I bought from Peter Stathis, who was the outgoing head of 3D design. He had a garage sale when he left, and he sold me like 8 of those for like $20 each. I'm like, yeah, Peter, I'll take them all. And so I began to make these objects, grouping these things that I was buying. And Charles and Heather, so Charles Eames and Heather McGill. Heather McGill, who was like a champion water skier, a collegiate water champion. I know that you would only use one, but anyway, I was making these objects. And so suitcases, I also started collecting. You could buy these things for $2, right? In Boston or New York, they'll cost you, $20 or $30, right? But in Detroit, I had this map of all the different thrift stores in town. I was living in Pontiac, and there was one right across the street from me, so I had this routine that I would go to all these. And so these hard shell suitcases, 1950s to 1970s, I started collecting them. Drawn to their color and their form. And I did a variety of different installations with them in the tall space before it was painted gray, tall space of the sculpture department. This is a drawing I found that I had made when I was 6 years old, where I was learning addition and subtraction through coloring graph paper. But reminded me a lot of something I would make, 25 years later. This is an early drawing that I did of another installation of suitcases, which is now in the collection of Mary Beth Kreiner of the Cranbrook Art Library. So I had my second year, I had the studio on the best studio on campus. I know that because Scott and I talked about that earlier, and we both decided that this is the best studio on campus. But it did have some problems. It has such big windows that you always felt like people were looking in. So I wanted to kind of mitigate that and have some sort of screen. And I had, 80 suitcases lying around, and I thought, okay, I'll combine these two. So I spent some time working on this. So that's the sculpture department, and that's the painting department. I don't know where everybody was at painting that day, but... So I used the existing structure of the windows and did very little. So I threaded these aluminum rods and made it so that I wouldn't have to make any major interventions. It also allowed me to learn how to use the milling machine and the lathe. There was a milling machine and a lathe in the basement studio near Sculpture. I think it was the managed by the 3D design department, but when I was a student, nobody was using it, so me and one other guy were there all the time, and it was really cool. And I remember going to a milling machine demo one time that Gary Griffin gave. He was the head of the metals department before E. Recyclenberg. And so he's talking about the milling machine, and at one point he stops and he's like, "This machine could make itself." You know, it's like such a poetic sentiment about a tool, right? So the other important thing that happened for me at Cranbrook was that I became interested in curating exhibitions. So I don't know about now, but when I was a student, the Forum Gallery was very active, and we turned over the exhibitions every week. So you could pitch an idea, and you would get $100 to buy food for the reception, and you'd gather all these people around and talk and discuss. So over the 2 years as a student, I participated in 8 different Forum Gallery exhibitions that either I exhibited in or that I curated. And so curating for me became a way of organizing ideas and objects and people, and then bringing them together to discuss over, Miller High Life and cheddar cheese. So this is Vito Conci, who was a visiting artist in the sculpture department during my time. And he was such an amazing presenter, right? I mean, we know his kind of performance work, and now he's doing kind of architecture. And I remember him being right here at the podium, and he couldn't stop. He was just jittering the whole time, he was looking for that cigarette, but he couldn't smoke in deSalle, right? So the whole weekend that he was here, he was just smoking away. This is Vito and I. Imagine if I had a beard, that would be me. So this is at the sculpture department for the dinner that we hosted for Vito Conci, and as you can see, he's with his cigarette. So I told him, "Hey Vito, I'm curating this exhibition called Cigarette as Muse, and I wonder if you would give me a piece for that. It's going to be held at the Forum Gallery." You ever heard of the Forum Gallery? It's going to be an awesome show. And he gave me a piece. So this is the cigarettes that he smokes, Gaulois, I forget. Does anybody speak French? How? Oh, yeah. So that's what he was smoking. So I said, "Vito, can you give me your cigarette packet?" And I had a plastic coffin. I said, "Here, I'll take your excess cigarettes and put them in this plastic coffin, and you give me your crumbled up thing." And he's like, "Oh no, I'm scared of that coffin. I'll just put the cigarettes in my pocket, but here, you can have that." So I included that in the exhibition. So it was student work and Vito Conci at the Forum Gallery. And then this major exhibition that I co-curated with a friend, David Adey from the sculpture department, and Chris Puzio from the architecture department, we wanted to see how the history of chair design at Cranbrook was resonating, if at all, with the current students. So we organized this chair show, and it was held at the Forum Gallery, and then we found a venue in Detroit. We thought even then it would be interesting to make some sort of connections between the world and the people at Cranbrook and the world and the people in Detroit. So we found a venue at the Detroit Contemporary. Aaron Timmerlin ran that space in Detroit. So the chair show opened here. We had a great, lively reception, and then we moved it to the Detroit Contemporary. And several pieces then sold from the Detroit Contemporary. So I thought, sold. That added a whole other layer of thinking about being a curator and organizing objects, ideas, and budgets. Because, artists need money to continue what they're doing, right? I'll talk a little bit about that later. So this was my piece for the exhibition, was made out of wheat board, a coffin. And I think that this chair show then continued for 8 or 9 years. I don't know if it's still going on now, but other students took on the idea of the chair show. They named it a different thing each year, and it was held at the Forum Gallery, and then it moved to some other venue, typically in the Detroit area. So this is another piece from a future chair, from subsequent chair show. It was a collaboration between Vivian Beer of the metals department and who did the powder coating of a shopping cart, and Mike Andrews of the sculpture department who scanned grocery meat and made upholstery out of that. This is Eric Stemmel, who took existing desks and retrofitted them to make them a little more useful and contemporary. So after I graduated, 2002, I got a job at the Art Museum. The Art Museum had this gallery called the Network Gallery, and it was somewhere located between. Physically, it was on this level of the museum, but it was a project of the Academy and the museum. So my job was to curate 3 exhibitions a year based on the work of Cranbrook alumni. So it allowed me to learn a lot more about the history of Cranbrook and what its alumni were doing, where they were, that sort of thing. So AJ, when we were talking about having an idea of the history of the place, it was a perfect job for me to learn more about who, what, and when, and where. And I got to work with graphic designers. We had a small budget, so I could always hire a talented 2D design graduate. And so this was done by Dawn Nye, who's now teaching in University of Maine. So she did all the gallery graphics. And then I also, one of the other exhibitions I curated at the Network Gallery, and the Network Gallery was important because it highlighted the work of alumni. The Art Museum and the Academy said to alumni, we value what you do, we want to show it, but it also became an interesting development tool for the Academy and also a way of bringing back some of the alumni and involving them in the current life of the place. So one of the other exhibitions I got to organize was Cranbrook to Lancaster and back. And this is the collection of Bob Fonnebecker. Does anybody know Bob Fonnebecker? Okay, great. So this guy is amazing. He's a lawyer by training. He's in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and for 40 years he's been collecting contemporary American craft. His 3 vacations a year are around Cranbrook's degree show, Alfred's degree show, and the Cleveland Institute of the Arts degree show. So he takes his car and he drives and he buys the work of the graduates. So these graduates 40 years ago were students, and 40 years later, these people are heads of departments all over the world. And the interesting thing about Bob is that he'll buy a piece, from Heather McGill for $20,000, and he'll pay Heather McGill each month an allotment for however many years it takes him. Or he'll buy a piece by, AJ, right? And he'll buy that piece for $500, and he'll pay AJ every month for however long it takes. So at any given time, he's paying off like 20 artists all over the world, and he's sending them checks. And part of the reason that I think he collects is to maintain that relationship with artists. But consequently, artists want their check, right? So if an artist moves, they let Bob Fonnebecker know that they've moved. So he has probably a better database than most schools, right? So Bob Fonnebecker, this is his collection installed in the Network Gallery, and it was pretty densely installed, mirroring the way that he lives with the objects that he owns. And what I learned about Bob is that he collects jazz records, he collects vintage modern furniture, he collects folk art, he collects contemporary craft, and he lives with all these objects together. So I tried to install them in that way. He has 40 acres in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and because he's been acquiring at least 2 objects a week for 40 years, every 10 years he's had to build another small structure to house the collection. And often the objects, you'll see that the scale of them are so that they fit in his car, So a piece by Marjorie Hudo, ceramics graduate from the Academy, along with a pressed tin vintage toy that Bob collects. Dan Anderson, Wanjin Kim, both Cranbrook grads, next to a folk art piece. So at that time in 2005, we identified that he had 88 alumni in his collection. So 9 years later, that's may have doubled. Okay, a little bit about my work. So I talked a little bit of my work, curating, network gallery. Martin Puryear is someone whose work I've always come back to, just smart, poetic, and of course there's elegantly crafted objects. There was a great exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art that traveled, a retrospective exhibition a couple of years ago. Hopefully some of you got to see that. So I like wood and I like tools, and learning about the history of different movements, I was drawn to tramp art. So cigar boxes at one point were readily available, and so there was a whole culture of people that made these elaborate boxes or often furniture out of these carved and notched panels of cigar boxes. And one of the things that appealed to me is just having a limited palette of tools. Eleanor and I were talking in her studio about, it's great to have a laser cutter and a 3D printer and all these different things, but there's also something wonderful about just having all you need in tools right here, So I thought, what's the equivalent today of folk art? And so for years, we had been collecting clementine crates and couldn't really get rid of them. I didn't know what to do with them, but they were just such beautiful and useful objects that we just kept amassing them. And then people find out that you collect them and they give you more. And so they began piling up. So you're like, wow, what am I going to do with these things? That's our cat Braveheart, who we found. She was a stray. We found her in Pontiac. You got to love the cat people. You always got to tug that string of the cat people. So I love disassembling the clementine crates and breaking them down into their component parts, not unlike minimalism and repetition. But there's something really wonderful about wood and working with wood. So I like breaking them down. And so for the past 12 years, I've always come back to the clementines and done clementine crates and done something with them. So here I'm breaking them down and laminating them. And I'm always drawing, ever since that Drawing Straws series, I've always kept a sketchbook. And regardless of how busy I've been, there are times after you leave Cranbrook where you won't have the space or the time or the physical resources to make three-dimensional objects. For me, keeping a sketchbook has always been critical. And it's typically a small sketchbook that'll fit in my jacket pocket. So I started thinking what I might do with these clementine crates, and the size of my notebook kind of led to the size of the objects that I eventually made. So these are, all about this size. Laminated triangles from the clementine crate, all kind of iconic architectural forms. House, right? I mean, that's pretty clear. Iconic house. And then I designed these just minimal powder-coated shelves way before Crate and Barrel did them. And here's an installation of them at the Suzanne Hilberry Gallery, which if you haven't been, it's just really elegant gallery, concrete floor, plaster walls, natural light coming in, designed by a Cranbrook architecture alum as well. So the other important thing that I want to say is that while I was in grad school, I met a lot of wonderful people. Through the Crit Club idea, what was critical for me, right? So a Crit Club, essentially, you ask people from different departments to come and you meet regularly to discuss each other's work, and it's a way of getting input about your work beyond your particular department. So we took that Crit Club idea and started this art collective called Telegraph, right? So Telegraph Road, which connects Detroit to the outlying suburbs, et cetera. I mean, it could have been called Woodward, but Woodward doesn't resonate as well as Telegraph, right? So there's 7 of us. Christian Tedeschi, ceramics grad, now teaching at California State University, Northridge. Haley Bates, metals grad, teaching at Colorado State University, Fort Collins. That's me. Tom Lauerman and Shannon Goff, both ceramics grads, now teaching at Penn State. Hartmut Austin, who is not a Cranbrook grad, a German painter who I met at a residency at Vermont Studio Center, who's now teaching at Minneapolis, and Brent Sommerhauser, who was teaching at CCS in the glass department and now works in Nevada for Cirque du Soleil. So, the 7 of us met in and around Detroit, and every year we've done some sort of project together. It started in 2004. There used to be the Navy Pier Show in Chicago, and as a response to that, a couple people took over a warehouse and say, hey, let's do our own thing where it's not the big galleries of New York. And so they called it the Stray Show, which we liked. And they invited us to exhibit some work. So the 7 of us got together and did that. This was way before there was an art show everywhere, every time, all the time. And so then we kind of hustled and got exhibition opportunities through our own network. Kansas City was one of them. And, we did a lot of the work ourselves. That's us installing. And then the university circuit was turned on to Telegraph. And they were like, oh, yeah, we'll offer you a travel budget, we'll do a little catalog, and we'll give you a stipend. And we'll have somebody install and paint the walls for you. We're like, oh, all right, cool. So I think that's important. A lot of you in the room here, you're going to go on, you're going to teach at universities, you're going to be adjuncts, you're going to be curators. I think it's important to keep in contact with the people who you like and respect and want to be in contact with. By the way, I think you should also be buying each other's work or trading each other for work. And so that's what we've been able to do with Telegraph. We draw on each other's networks. Because a lot of universities, they'll have a curator to manage their space, but that curator, gallery director is often overworked, does not get a sabbatical, does not get the summers off. Greg, Tom, is that right? Okay. So what they do is they rely on a committee of faculty to help program the space. So guess what? If my friend is on that faculty and he knows about Telegraph, he's going to be an advocate for us. So that's how some of our exhibition opportunities have resulted. Piece by Shannon Goff, Haley Bates. This is a wall cladding I did with clementine crates. The clementine crate is really interesting, the side of the clementine crate, because on the one side it's just clear, bare, wooden, it's minimalism on one side. On the other side, the screened image is pop art. So you have like pop and minimal right there. So Emu is Muse, right? So the Eastern Michigan University invited us to do an exhibition there, and we thought, okay, rather than like just shipping work and installing it there, let's spend a week in residence and make work from whatever we find. So it's this construct that, the cigarette as muse construct. I mean, it could be anything as muse, right? Blank as muse. I like that as a construct. So we decided we'd spend a week at Eastern Michigan and just make work. So that's us just making work and eating. And I mean, I love that whenever we do these type of things, the table is so key, because it's when we have meals or we have a glass of wine that we come and sit at the table and we discuss what we're doing. Not unlike what happens at a home, right? They say that the kitchen is the hearth and the kitchen table is the hearth, and that's what happens with us. This was the installation at Eastern Michigan. So Christian Tedeschi, who's now in California, he had also done the object. He was one of the people involved with Object Orange, along with Greg Tom and Jacques Lou and Mike Richardson. So Christian spent a couple days just pulling charred remains of Detroit homes and bringing them to Ypsilanti, and he made this really beautiful Ferris wheel. And it was really, it was dirty and it was hard breathing in the 3,000 square foot gallery, but when you work with Christian Tedeschi, that's what you get. You sign up for that. But the end result is always a great one. So from those charred remains of Detroit homes, our other colleague, the painter Hartmut Austin, he had been working on a series of watchtowers, so he decided to use the charcoal from Detroit to do the drawings. And Tom Lauerman and I were working in making these small sculptures out of ceramics, so we had a couple kilns in the gallery going. I'll talk a little bit about that later, a little bit more. This was our first international exhibition opportunity, and It developed through Hartmut Austin, right, one of our 7 members. And there's this gallery in Berlin that it's this pavilion, and okay, here it is. It's a glass pavilion, and you install work, and for the opening reception, it's open, everybody comes in, you can see the work, and then they close all the doors, and it becomes a vitrine, so you cannot go inside the space beyond the opening night. And I had been thinking a lot about Germany and craft, and for many years I'd been doing these drawings of aluminum-related objects, vessels. The Aluminum by Design exhibition that started at the Pittsburgh Museum traveled to Cranbrook my first year as a student, and there was a lot of aluminum objects that really resonated with me, from the frame of an Audi to the Bambi trailer. So for years I've been drawing these kind of objects. And so it turns out that the Zeppelin company made these dirigibles, so they have an interior aluminum structure and then they're clad. And the US Navy for many years had these dirigibles. They had 5 at one point, and 4 of the 5 were made in America, and all of those crashed and burned. The only one that survived was the USS Los Angeles, which happened to be made in Germany. So I was really interested in cultures like the German culture and the Japanese culture and their tradition of craft and aesthetics. So with this Berlin exhibition, we got the chance to kind of revisit this Zeppelin, and my wife Christine and I adjusted the drawing of that USS Los Angeles to fit the scale of this pavilion. So the exhibition was held in Berlin, and then it traveled to a private home in Germany. Klaus and Catherine Entemann, who've been very involved with Cranbrook, invited Telegraph to have a small showing of our work at their home in Germany. So we made a slightly different version for that. And then it allowed me to get back to drawing and do these kind of iterative drawings of Zeppelins. So I like to collect a lot of things. When I was collecting thrift store things, I collected a lot of them, and then you see them in mass, and then you weed away the ones that you think are less successful. I kind of do that with drawings as well. So this exhibition at the Entemann's home, turns out that there's a Zeppelin museum near their home, and Catherine Entemann brought my drawings to the curator at the Zeppelin Museum, and they said, we want to buy your drawings. And I said, oh, wow, that's perfect. That's great. So of this Telegraph group, Tom Larriman and I have had this collaboration going, these small ceramic sculptures that reference architecture. We call them Sculptures in Love with Architecture, SILWA. Turns out SILWA is also a German porn magazine, but we did not know that at the time. And Sculptures in Love with Architecture, that title came from John Haydock's book called Architectures in Love. John Haydock was an architect, but he was really a sculptor. Right? So Tom and I have been doing these small pieces, usually in ceramics, sometimes in wood, for many years. Bless you. These are some that I made. Some drawings, again, the importance of drawing for me. This is Tom installing. So, we've had various exhibitions of this body of work, and either Tom and or I are able to go, and it's great to ship these really small sculptures and flesh out the exhibition from that. Sometimes we also show our drawings that relate to the pieces. This is at Loyola University in Chicago. Tom is, so he teaches in the sculpture, ceramics, and architecture departments at Penn State. So he has a facility with materials, and he can make like a pinch pot, or he can build a 3D printer. I mean, incredible guy, Tom Larriman. So, and my drawings tend to be pretty flat and simple. Although, as Donald Judd said, simple does not mean it's not complex, right? So this is a drawing that I was playing with, and Tom Larriman saw the drawing, and he extrapolated a 3-dimensional object from that. So this led to one of our collaborations. These are slip cast ceramics. And iterations of that form followed. This is kind of roughly based on the Maya Grotel courtyard and the forced perspective arch. This is roughly based on a Shimpo wheel for throwing clay, Japanese wheel. This is our most recent exhibition at Grizzly, which Allison and John just got back from in Philadelphia. So again, clementine crates, you know, this is like the fourth type of thing that I've made from clementine crates. Pallets. I'm drawn to the repetition of the form, as you know, and I'm always photographing pallets all over the country. They're just such useful objects that have done so much hard work, and we just kind of, you know, okay, you're done. Okay, so now, I talked about the importance of the form gallery in my development, and it happened pretty organically. You know, I didn't come to Cranbrook thinking I wanted to be a curator. So it happened organically through the form gallery experience, and then with the network gallery. You know, Greg Whitcup and Gerhard Nodell hired me and gave me the chance to do that, even though I didn't have any formal training in being a curator. And had such great experiences through that. Allison Wong and I worked together at the Network Gallery, and now she's an artist, curator, arts entrepreneur. You know, it's led to a lot of great things. So at the Society of Arts and Crafts, I was hired as a curator, so my full-time job was to do that. The Society was founded in 1897 in Boston with the goal of supporting contemporary American artists and craftsmen. And it was very influential to George Booth in his involvement at CCS, which was originally called the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts, and also in George Booth's idea and planning of Cranbrook. So I think it's interesting that it's come full circle, and that I'll be the executive director there. So at the Society, I curate 4 exhibitions a year based on the work of contemporary American artists working in ceramics, glass, metal, fiber, and wood. I feel like this sort of work does not get the respect and attention that fine art gets, right? And you know, it's tricky what we call fine art, what we call craft, what we call fine craft. In the end, it's about interesting objects that resonate with you one way or another, regardless of what you call them. But I do feel a certain mission to kind of support the weaker left arm, which is craft, you know. And yeah, so this is an exhibition I curated called Abstracted Landscapes. This is an exhibition where we focused on the material of wood. You know, I mean, conceptual ideas are important, but isn't material important as well? Exhibition called Architecture Structure. This is an Abby Newbold piece. She's a fiber alum. This is an exhibition called The Loom, On, Around, and Through. And this is a piece by Mike Andrews, who was a sculpture alum who now teaches at the Art Institute of Chicago. I just want to give you a flavor for some of the exhibitions I've curated, and they're based around a theme or a process or a material. Sonia Clark, an exhibition that I curated called Political Craft. This piece is called Afro Abe. She does these beautiful French knot embroidery technique on the $5 bill. And this is Dave Adey, sculpture alum. This is Thomas Gelson-Leiter, ceramics alum. He deconstructs cups, ceramic cups, production ceramic cups, and rejoins them. Jessica Strauss, an exhibition I curated called Contemporary Folk. This exhibition just closed last month. It was the work of Bill Daley. William Daley was a World War II vet who taught for 35 years at University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And a lot of students from University of the Arts found their way to Cranbrook. So he makes these beautiful, large-scale ceramic vessels, always on fired clay. He gave up glazes in the 70s. He gave up the ceramic wheel in the 70s. Yeah. And another exhibition I curated, the work of Wendy Maruyama. She's the head of the furniture and woodworking department at San Diego State University. She's Japanese-American, third generation. And she did a body of work that reflects on the Japanese-American internment, right? This is a photo by Dorothea Lange. So Japanese Americans, whether they were citizens or not, during World War II, were forced to leave their homes, and they were put in camps, 10 different camps around the country. And Wendy remade all of these tags. So there were 120,000 tags that she remade with community groups around the country. And then she made them into these sculptures, each representing one of the 10 camps. So at the Society of Arts and Crafts, I applied for this grant, and we got this $200,000 grant to travel this exhibition to 4 museums around the country, the smallest version of which started at our location in Boston, then it went to Arkansas, Arizona, San Jose, California, which has the largest Japantown in the country, and the exhibition is currently in San Francisco at the Museum of Craft and Design. And there were 3 components to the exhibition. There were the tags. There were a series of sculptural furniture objects that Wendy made. There's a wall-mounted cabinet where she incorporates a lot of the images by Dorothea Lange of the camps. And the third component of it was objects that we borrowed from the Japanese American Historical Society, and these were actual trunks and suitcases that were used by the internees. So they had, 2 days to pack, get their stuff, and clear out. But my wife reminded me this morning that, this is interesting for me because it also harkens back to the suitcases that I was collecting, 10 years earlier. Yeah, so although I'm working with contemporary crafts, it doesn't mean I'm not interested in the rest of the art-making world. So I actually am very interested in painting. This is Wayne Thiebaud painting, and he died maybe last year. But I remember reading an interview with him where they asked him about artists that influenced his work. And Wayne Thiebaud said that he was very drawn to the work of Giorgio Morandi. And he described Giorgio Morandi's work as a theater of repetition. And I thought, wow, that's beautiful, a theater of repetition. And I have a particularly soft spot for ceramics. And I thought slip casting is essentially the theater of repetition, right? I think a lot of attention is paid to the wheel when throwing and making work in ceramics, but there's so many ways of working with ceramics. That's one of the beauties of the material. So I developed an exhibition just focused on slip casting. This is the work of Paul Eshelman from Illinois, who makes these beautiful, functional casseroles. This is the work of Nicholas Bivens, who was a resident at the Archie Bray Foundation in Montana, and he's made this, place setting for 10 people, and it's a sculptural object. It's installed on the wall, but then you can pull the piece, and it's a functional piece of ceramic ware. This is the work of Seth Nagelberg, who's a Cranbrook grad, teaches at Parsons, the new school. And he made a series of these salt and pepper shakers. He took a breast pump and doubled that form, and then made a mold and plaster and then slip cast them. So they wind up being an object somewhere between a toy and a sculpture. And I'm always drawn to that size and scale of thing. Okay, 2 slides left. As AJ mentioned, I was recently elected to the board at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. Has anybody been there? Cool. And there's a long connection between Cranbrook and Haystack. Jack Leonard Larson is one of the board members emeritus, and Toshiko Takaezu, Niels Diffrient has been on the board. It's this amazing school, open in the summer, and they have 2-week workshops in ceramics, metal, printmaking, photography, And a recent initiative is this thing called the Open Studio Residency. So they got a foundation grant to support a 2-week residency. So it's not a workshop, and they select 50 artists from around the country and a few international artists to just come make work for 2 weeks. And you could use any of the facilities. So it's kind of like being at Cranbrook for 2 weeks with 49 other people that you may not know. And each department has its own expert technician to man the shop and to help you realize your work. We have one of them right here. And it was amazing because, so I did this residency before joining the board, and there was a fellow who was an industrial designer who designed the interiors of the Moss showroom in New York. There was a fellow who had been a furniture maker for 40 years. There was a fellow who just finished his degree at RISD. And you could all just make very fluidly through any of the departments. MIT gave Haystack a fabrication lab, so you can do anything from basket making to 3D printing to laser cutting, and you share 3 meals together each day, and that was a critical part of the experience. So that's Haystack. Oh, that's Jack Leonard. That's a famous image of Jack Leonard Larson working at Haystack, and we actually recreated that photograph this year with some contemporary characters. We're still trying to find out who these people are. Nobody could identify them. I think the shadow of Jack Leonard Larson is so large that, like, who are these people? Nobody knows. We've asked Gerhard Nodell, we've asked everybody, but if you know, please tell me. So yes, this Open Studio Residency, you should apply. If you get in, it's fully funded, and it happens at like late May to early June. And I'll just close with some of the pieces that I made while I was there were these based on insulator forms. Telephone poles have these porcelain insulators that the wires are strung through. And these are some pieces by Tom Larriman that we donated them to a benefit auction at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit. So that's the freshest body of work. 48 minutes, not bad. Thank you very much. So, any questions? Okay, yes? Right there? Yeah, right there. Thank you.
I have a question about your curating practice.
Yes.
In the exhibition Contemporary Folk, I was really interested in how you decided to define or delineate perimeters of what would go into that exhibition, and like who would get left out, or like what, like I'm sure there's a lot of decision making that happens at that point, so I want to know more about it.
Yeah, good question. Contemporary folk. So that was an exhibition with, I selected 6 makers. 3 of them had graduate degrees in art, and 3 of them had no formal art training. And that was part of I realized that at the Society of Arts and Crafts, we often give a lot of attention to people with degrees. And it occurred to me that there are a lot of people without degrees that are making good and interesting work. So that exhibition tried to bring some of those people together. So that little bottle that I showed was by Jessica Strauss, a ceramics graduate from the 1980s. But then I also had the work of this guy Todd Smith. He's a welder from New Hampshire, and didn't finish high school, but he makes these beautiful toys for his kids, these steel toys. He also owns like 10 acres, and he collects all kinds of objects and builds a small building on his property each year. So probably not the type of guy that a regular museum would give attention to, but I felt like it was part of our mission to extend to people like Todd Smith. And I keep a spreadsheet. Like, I start a lot of my curating ideas by keeping a spreadsheet. It's a great way of organizing the ideas and the people that you're working with. We could talk a little bit about that more later if that doesn't fully answer your question. Any more? Come on, it's got to be, yeah? Okay. Yes, right up there.
I was wondering, because the Society of the Arts and Crafts
Yeah, good question. We're a scrappy, small, nonprofit arts organization, and we haven't made the time to look back as much as we should. Do you know what I mean? And I mean that combined with with the fact that there's a lot of contemporary craft artists that I feel should be getting attention. But you know, we've been talking about this a little bit with staff. Now that like craft and making is so hot and cool, you know, and DIY, and I think it's important to look back and frame what's been done with what's currently happening. So I would like to do something like that moving forward. If you have any ideas, I'd love to talk to you about that. Yeah. Do you work at Cranbrook? Yes. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. Oh, yes, sorry. One more question. Gregory Woodcup.
One more question here. So you're about to add, the way I see it, kind of a third leg to what your life and career and work is going to be defined as. So start as artist, curator, and now this role as being an administrator on top of that. Could you talk a little bit now, maybe as a way of bringing this all together? I mean, how do those all inform each other? Do you think of them as discrete entities, or do they completely merge together in your work?
Yes, really good question, because you know the three legs of that stool, right? Artist, curator, and now arts administrator. They say that a three-legged stool is more stable than a four-legged stool, right? But I feel like I'm going to have to fold up that curator leg a little bit, right? I need to hire a curator to do what I was doing, but to do it even better than I was doing it, right? And I need to support them and let them do that. I reluctantly give up some of those responsibilities because I love curating. But the way I see it as executive director, now I'm going to be able to have a different type of impact on the field and to be able to help the field in a different way. Not necessarily in a better way or a higher way, but in a different way. But to me, I've always felt like I became a curator through the door that was open in the studio, right? So I didn't study art history or art criticism. So I feel like as a curator, I was very empathetic and to the cause of an artist. I want to try and, as an arts administrator, continue to have that empathy and level of understanding that only being an artist can allow. Yeah, Greg, I start January 1st, so this is all forming for me as well. But I can tell you that essentially I feel like I'll have a different calling now as executive director than I did as curator, but I want to keep my toe in that curating world that I've loved. You know? But I'm sure I can learn some lessons from you as well moving forward, because you know you're the museum director, right? But you were also involved in curating, right? And at one point you were an intern here, so you have this long historical knowledge of the place, right? So I want to learn from you too how that happened. It would probably a conversation that would involve a beer or two. Linda Ross, question? Linda Ross of the Sybaris Gallery, Royal Oak, formerly of the Sybaris Gallery, yes.
Going back to your first slide, the we, seems to be that there's a trend now for artists to be socially involved in the community, to be an active sort of interloper in doing things that impact the community, in a positive way. Do you see in your role as curator, your new role as
Yeah, really good question. I wanted to flip to that me-we, but thought that it would be distracting to do so when you were asking the question. Let's do that now. This is a GIF I learned. Yes.
Many grants are, seems to be, rely on those kind of interactions, artists are maybe getting grants that,
Yeah, and that's come up a couple times as we're discussing social practice, right? And I know Hannah and I talked about the idea of feeling like an interloper and drawing too much from the community or in an effort to help it. Christine and I went to a Theaster Gates talk on Tuesday, and I thought, man, this guy is doing something. This neighborhood in Chicago, he's buying a building and he's making something that the community needs. The city has not been able to do that, right? And how can we, as this organization founded in 1897, get some of the same vibe and energy that Theaster Gates has been able to do, right? I mean, sometimes you have this storied history, but if you're not relevant and contemporary now, what are you going to do? But I do feel like there's an element of social practice in that what we do is support the creative livelihood of American artists and craftsmen, right? We have 3 major programs. We have a retail store, an exhibition gallery, and this large juried craft show called Craft Boston. And each of these 3 elements have an educational component, but we also create a physical marketplace for the exchange of objects and sometimes money, but there's also the exchange of understanding, and there's the building of relationships between the artists and other artists, the artists and collectors, students, educators. And so I think that's a critical role of the society, and I want to keep that going. And it's not easily funded either. We're not a school, we're not a job training program. So it's a matter of speaking about what we do in the right way to the right people to get the funding necessary to do it even better. We can talk more about that tomorrow too. Is that a Boris Valley brooch you're wearing? Very nice. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone.